Boom! You wake up, your eyes open, and you see you're in a cave. You try to move your head and look around, but you can't. It's restrained. You think to yourself, has my dominatrix gone too far? And then you realise you're in Plato's cave. Plato's Allegory of the Cave is one of the oldest analogies in philosophy. Appearing in Book 7 of the Republic, it is used to demonstrate his theory of the forms. So what exactly is Plato's Allegory of the Cave? Plato begins with his mouthpiece character Socrates, talking of a large underground cave in which people have lived since birth. Restrained and unable to move any body part, even their heads, all they can see is the wall in front of them. Behind the wall they're shackled to roars a great fire, with a walkway running across it. A series of puppeteers now use puppets and objects on the walkway to cast a shadow on the wall that the prisoners see. So, I know what you're thinking, it's just a shadow on the wall, but
aware of the power of shadows.
The prisoners know nothing other than the shadows. Shadows of everything, from pots and carvings to puppeteers and sculptures. The prisoners begin to talk to one another, knowing nothing else other than the shadows. On the wall they begin to think this is reality. Next he says that due to an echo, all sound in the cave appears to come from that wall. So the prisoners will consider that the shadows are the beings that make the noise. They give all the shadows names, and the prisoners who can name them the most are considered the most knowledgeable. One day, a prisoner is freed, but it's a great pain to him. He now sees the bright roaring fire and his eyes are in pain. Next he is shown the items that cast the shadow and he is dumbfounded. Was all he saw before a lie? No, the prisoner thinks, trying to run back to the safety of his former captivity, but he cannot. The prisoner is dragged up by force up a steep and rough ascent to the surface, out into the light of the sun. When he's dragged, he feels great pain, frustration and anger. The sun glaring into his eyes would mean that he would not be able to see what is in front of him until his eyes has adjusted. First being able to look at the shadows, and then later the reflections of things in the water, till finally he can view the objects in and of themselves. Plato's mouthpiece character then says that eventually the former prisoner may look directly at the sun to see it. He would deduce that the sun is the cause of all things, the seasons, weather, years, even life. Everything exists because of the sun. Looking back at where he came from, he begins to feel sorry for those that he left behind. So he heads back into the cave, but his eyes have become unaccustomed to the darkness, so he cannot see. This being the case, he can no longer identify the shadows. Rambling of nonsense and unable to identify the shadows, they believe his head has gone and his eyesight ruined. Why would they believe him? They do not think being free is good, as if they were released, they would go mad and blind as he is and be no longer able to identify the shadows. The end result being that if the other prisoners can, they will rid themselves of this man by a means of murder, so that he may not corrupt them. Gee, I wonder where they had the idea that they could kill them from.
What are you waiting for? No! 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 Ah!
Now, you might be wondering, well, Athena, what does this demonstrate? It demonstrates the journey a philosopher takes in discovering the forms according to Plato. He begins in the cave, which is in fact our reality, the world we find ourselves in. And then someone comes along and introduces them to philosophy. For me, it was at college. And then, when they are introduced to the fire, which is their first taste of the reality beyond the world, and then they are dragged up the painful, frustrating climb to reality.
To the desert of the real.
This is the journey that a philosophy student will take in studying philosophy and becoming a philosopher. Then, when out into the real world, he sees the things in themselves, and this is his recollection of the forms, and finally seeing the sun, which is the ultimate form, the form of the good. But what are the forms? They exist in a non-physical realm where we are before and after life. When we see an object, we only recognise the object as what it is because it participates in the form of that object. So as an example, we can take a tree. So we only recognise a tree because it participates in the form of a tree. Same with the colour red. All red objects are red because they participate in the form of red. A form is the perfect version of the object itself. But is the form of red actually red? No, because then it would have to participate in itself, and that is not possible. The form cannot participate in itself. So the form of red is not red, but then how is it the perfect form of red? The form is what it is in its own right. But then you might be asking, hold on, how are the forms then? Because then they would have to participate in the form of something else. Well, they do. They participate in the form of the good, which is represented by the sun. But how does the form of the good become a form? Because to be a form, it would have to participate in itself. Well, the form of the good does in fact participate in itself because it's perfect. You know, it's kind of easy to see how this inspired a certain religious idea. So, with knowledge of the forms, the prisoner goes back into the cave to try and help his fellow prisoners. This is the philosopher trying to teach people philosophy. But with no ability to perform well in this world, they aren't respected. And in extreme cases, Socrates, even executed. The most famous piece of art that is inspired by this is probably The Matrix, particularly the first one, where Neo is confronted by Morpheus. Neo lives in what he thinks is the real world, but instead lives in a simulation, a modern equivalent of the cave. When Neo takes the red pill and is released, he struggles with the real world. He finds it hard to accept this new world and also struggles physically, but Morpheus and his new friends help him through this tough time. And soon he goes back in to save his fellow prisoners. There are even attempts made on his life by the agents to stop him from saving the robot's prisoners. Most people are probably familiar with the Allegory through this excellent movie. And that is my first philosophy video. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been really fun to read some Plato again. I haven't read Plato since my undergrad when I read the 5 Dialogues. Remember to like and subscribe, ring that bell to get notifications, and leave a comment if you have a suggestion or anything you want to say. I look forward to seeing you next week, babies.